What's up, everybody? My name is Ray Taylor. This is the early retirement vlog. I am here today to talk about podcasting and how I got into it. I was asked recently how I originally got into podcasting and YouTubing, creating online content, I guess, was the general question. So, back in I first heard about podcasting. There was this channel on that I had on DirecTV for a minute called, or is on DirecTV. The show was called, or the network was called Tech TV. On that network, it was a bunch of like computer questions and tech stuff, super geeky shit. Um, and one of the shows on there was called The Screensavers. One of the hosts of The Screensavers, his name was Kevin Rose, and one day they were talking about something. They were talking about like RSS feeds, and he had mentioned that he was doing this thing called a podcast called The Broken. And so I checked it out. It was in video form. There was no YouTube yet. This was like probably 2004, maybe, somewhere around there. 03, 04, 05, somewhere around there. Um, so I checked that out. Didn't really get into podcasting, but I checked it out. I was like, oh, this is kind of a weird thing. It was just him and a buddy of his sitting on a couch with their laptops open, just kind of talking about tech stories, which later that became Dignation, where uh, Kevin Rose and Alex Albrecht, higher quality, higher production quality. But Dignation, totally rad show. These are the shows that I came about in probably '07, um, and started subscribing to them on YouTube. So subscribing to these like hour long podcasts through iTunes, because still at that time YouTube was only 15 minutes. So the only way, if you wanted to put out online content, you had to host your own servers. You had to do your own servers. You had to do a bunch of stuff. It's super complicated. Um, so it wasn't until, and in '07, '08, I had done the Billy Dallas Show, which only went like 6 or 7 episodes. It was primarily a video podcast. I hosted it on YouTube. And that's, so each video had to be chopped down to 15 minutes. And that style is still around. If you ever see YouTube videos that have just super quick cuts, that comes from early YouTube days where they needed the smallest file size possible and also the smallest runtime possible. So all those quick cuts that you see, that's old school. That's old school shit. Now it's just used for gimmicks and because they're uninteresting to sit and talk in front of a camera, they do a bunch of cutting. Um, so I did the Billy Dallas Show. I played a character called Billy Dallas. I was from the quote unquote South. I wanted to be a roadie for Atmosphere, which is a hip hop group. So I moved to LA and found out that he's not from LA, that he's in Minnesota. So I'm trying to raise money while living in LA so that I can go to Minnesota to be a roadie for Atmosphere. And I was going to make money by becoming famous on the internet. So it was this whole like backstory thing. The show was structured a lot like the Totally Rad Show, where they reviewed movies and TV shows and video games and stuff like that. So for Billy Dallas, he was just learning about the internet, so it was like YouTube and MySpace, and he just finally got around to watching the Goonies. So I had fun with it, but it was I. There's no way I could sustain it. The amount of work it took to shoot an episode and then have to upload it to the computer and then having to edit it, everything took forever. So it didn't last. About a year and a half later, I started getting into audio podcasts finally. One of the hosts, Dan Trachtenberg, from the Totally Rad Show, was a guest on the Slash Filmcast, which is a weekly movie review podcast. Um, so I subscribed to that. I love movies. I love their discussions on movies. So that was the first audio podcast I listened to. Then I've subscribed to, all the big ones. You got Adam Carolla and Kevin Smith, Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan I started right when he did the first Ustream broadcast. Um, I started watching his, and I was already doing at that time. So anyway, back to the Slash Filmcast. Um, so I listened to them, and after about a year or so listening to them, I'd moved into more of a permanent place because I was kind of bouncing around a lot, and decided to set up a studio. And David Chen, who's the host of the Slash Filmcast and produces it, put a blog out on how he does it. Both of his guests are non-local. He uses Skype to get their audio from the different parts of the country that the other co-hosts live. And the way I wanted to set it up would have been similar too. Um, so I basically followed step by step his procedure to set up the podcast. That's how I set up the Inspired Disorder podcast from day one. So we were broadcasting live on Ustream. Didn't have video, so it was just audio, and then probably just a mic or a camera on me. My co-host Derek was in Palm Springs. My other co-host Justin was either in the next room over, talking to me through Skype, or at a different apartment, same city, both in San Diego. So that's how I run the podcast for a long time, and just it did the probably did about 30 episodes with those two guys. Everybody I broke my hand. Justin got a new job, so did Derek, or Justin was going back to school. Derek got a new job, so we kind of took a break from it. After about a year and a half, I came back with just me and Justin, and by that time I had listened to Smodcast and Adam Carolla and Joe Rogan, and I'm like, okay, the show before was super structured. I did show notes before the show, so we had an outline of everything we were going to talk about. But when I came back, it was just me and Justin, and we were going to do it free form. We didn't have a actual schedule, so we tried to do them as often as we could. And that lasted for a good amount of time until Justin wanted to leave. And it's kind of rough because I did a few episodes just by myself. It was a bad time of year, blah, blah, blah. But Keith, my current co-host, we had just done, so this was just after Hurricane Sandy hit New York. I had been, I had a podcast network at the time, and I'd been talking with a couple of the other podcast hosts in the network to see if we could potentially do like a 24-hour marathon podcast live. We thought about doing maybe Google Hangout. I was using Ustream Producer and Skype. So we were able to figure it out. Hurricane Sandy happened, and we'd kind of been talking about it. I'm like, fuck it. I'm just going to try and do it. My friend Yuck Nasty, hip-hop artist from Wisconsin, he recorded the audio of the first episode. I did all the video and ran all the phones and everything. And at the end of that podcast, so the idea was 24 hours, we're accepting donations, and then we were going to donate it to somebody who was within or just on the outside of our community who was affected. We were going to donate the money to them. And it went to a family in New York, which Yuck Nasty's fellow recording artists, their neighbors. It was kind of a thing. But we found somebody, raised the money, we figured out it was possible. And at the end of that podcast, or after that podcast, Keith offered to come and fill in for Justin while he was gone. And I said sure. And kind of knowing that Justin most likely wasn't going to come back. And also, I love doing the podcast. I love podcasting. So Keith joined the podcast, and From then on, we've done. I don't. He probably started episode 70 or 60. And Keith started out as just a guest on on the Inspired Disorder podcast. He was on probably 3 times. We had a lot in common. Clearly, everybody that I had at the time, we all had a lot in common. He's a big fan of UFC. He wanted to become a stand-up. He even did stand-up for a while, for a year or two, back in Dayton, or in somewhere around there. I forget where he's actually doing, in Ohio somewhere. Um, and then we've grown the podcast. So the podcast was just audio only, and over the years, I've wanted to add more and more video. So getting Keith's video, anybody that I had on Skype to get their live video feed into the main video, took a while. Was finally able to figure that out. So was able to get a lot of good video content, remotely, just using the internet. And now everything's filmed. Keith is my roommate. We film. We have part of the apartment that's the studio. We go in and we film 2 episodes a week. And when we started, it was like 3 hours. We were trying to do 3 hours, just like Joe Rogan. Like, fuck it. If he could do it, we could do it. It was a lot of fun. Pretty challenging to go 3 hours, but we ended up, once you do it enough, it gets a lot easier. When we went to video, no, what did we do? At some point, we had to cut down to just 2 hours. It was where we were hosting the limit on file size. So 2 hours worked good. And then now we usually do about an hour and a half, but we do 2 episodes a week. The episodes are kind of themed, so we'll either talk about UFC in one episode, or movies, or comic books. Basically anything that we're passionate about. So that's kind of my podcast journey. I've produced a bunch of podcasts in the past. I think I've talked about some of this before on either this podcast or the Inspired Disorder podcast, but I produced a bunch of other audio podcasts that, didn't last. Yeah. So that's how I got into podcasts. Now, especially once I got into audio podcasts, I started to subscribe to a lot of different ones. I've unsubscribed and resubscribed and subscribed to new shows. A lot of the new ones I listen to, like for MMA, the MMA Hour I watch. I actually just watched the live. It's live every Monday on YouTube. It's like a 3.5 hour podcast, all MMA news, and interviews and stuff like that. So MMA Hour, Anik and Florian, and there's probably another UFC one, at least another UFC one in there. And then comedy ones, I love Doug Loves Movies. I love Getting Doug with High. Kill Tony's great. I wish I could get my hands on the way they have their production set up. I think I can help. The fact that I love the show. I love the people involved with the show. It's just really disappointing that a show that's been around for hundreds of episodes still can't figure out how to consistently have good audio. Some episodes have great audio. Other episodes are just unlistenable. But I love the show. It's fucking amazing. Your Mom's House, a funny show, of course, Joe Rogan Experience. But check out all those podcasts. I mean, podcasts are great. That's why I got into podcasts, because I love them. It's fun to just speak your opinion, and in kind of a entertaining way, hopefully, and record it and all that stuff, put it out in the world, and you can hear all the negative and all the criticism. And then also love. There's love out there. So anyway, that's my podcasting story, how I got into podcasting. I mean, it's all easy to do. It's easier now to start a podcast than it was back then. And I've definitely helped a lot of people start podcasts. So if you have any questions, you want to do a podcast, for sure, leave me questions in the comment section of YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/inspireddisorder. And I would say if you are thinking about doing a podcast, think about what kind of podcast you want to do. Are you going to have guests on? Is it going to be just you? Is it just you and a friend? Just you and a friend and guests. Do you want to just do video? You want to do audio? You want to do both? What do you want to do? How do you want to do it? Because there's thousands of different ways to set up however you're going to record it. If you want to do video, what length of video, all these questions. Kind of have an idea. You can always change, um, but and if you want to start out just yourself and maybe get guests later, there's specific setups that you can use to where you can still grow them and add things to it and do more, um, rather than having to repurchase, get a whole new setup just because you want to add a new feature to your podcast. But anyway, ask me a question if you have any questions on podcasting. I am not an expert, but I've been doing it for a long time. Still trying to figure out how to become successful doing it, but I still enjoy it. I love doing it. And if for whatever reason you feel burnt out doing it, like in your 30 episodes in, good luck, because I'm at 320 episodes of the Inspired Disorder podcast, and I've been burnt out a ton of times. It's been going solid for probably the last 3 years, 4 years, as far as just constantly every week, new episodes. Now we do 2 episodes a week. So I've definitely added a lot more to what I do with the podcast, but the podcast can be as simple as the Monday morning podcast with Bill Burr, where it's just him talking into a microphone by himself for, however long it goes, 38 hour. Um, or it can be as complex as you want, where it's basically a TV show. Uh, so anyway, I highly recommend doing it. Thank you all for watching. You follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Ray Taylor. You can check out my new art series, The Many Faces. It's available only through my website, inspireddisorder.com/faces. The Many Faces ink drawing series, portrait series, expressionist uh, portrait series, ink drawing, my new stuff, my new work. It's going to be an ongoing series. So just like a podcast, I'm going to be constantly adding new work to the series. So definitely go if you want to help support me, if you want to help support the things I do, and you're looking to decorate your walls with original artwork, please buy my stuff, inspireddisorder.com/faces. And if you're aware of a site called Patreon, Patreon, it's where you can donate to artists like myself. So it's a monthly donation. You could start with $12 a year, dollar a month is really nothing. But you get extra perks. If you donate more, there's things like merch discounts. So if you plan on buying a lot of my artwork, you know, get a 25% or 50. I haven't decided yet, but get a giant discount if you're a patron, and buy a bunch of work, save some money, support me. It's a win-win. So go donate, patreon.com, patreon.com/Inspired Disorder. Thank you all for all of your support. Thank you for all of your views. Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, make sure you have a great week. That's it, people. Peace.